Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler, episode number 186. Today's topic is going to be about what does go into a WordPress version release. Let's go around the very small room real quick and get everyone introduced. Let's start with George. George, tell us all about yourself.
I'm George. I work at Automattic. I love my SNES, and currently working on Video Press.
Nice. Awesome. How about you, Mike?
Hey, I'm Mike Schroder, and I'm the WordPress platform lead over at DreamHost, and most recently worked on WordPress 4.5.
Awesome. What about you, Russ?
I'm Russ. I'm in Vegas. I do WordPress stuff, and interested in asking Mike 1,000 million questions.
Sweet. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at jasontucker.us, and I am on Twitter as Jason Tucker. All right. So we wanted to
time for our little intimate fireside chat going on.
Yeah, I know. It's like everybody get all warm and toasty here.
I brought s'mores. You
brought s'mores. Awesome. So we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how a WordPress version, a release is born, how it's built, where it starts, and we brought somebody who we know knows this stuff because he just did the most recent release, which is release 4.5. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about how does that start? How did you become the lead for this particular release, and then kind of give us a little bit of an overview.
Sure. Well, I think it probably happens a little bit different for everyone, and I'm hoping that in the future the role gets spread out even amongst a greater group of people. But essentially, I think that the core team is always sort of watching for folks that might be interested and that might want to put in the time and have the qualifications to be able to do it. I've been chatting so I worked on 3.9 with Nascent, which was a really great intro into the whole thing, and I definitely learned a lot from him. I had, not immediately after, but about a year after, I was asked if I'd be interested in doing it again at some point, and I was like, okay, well, not right now. Actually, it didn't go down quite like that. I was in a bar with Nason, and my wife was there, and we were at a WordCamp, and Nason comes up, and he's like, so, you want to lead another release? And Elizabeth looks over, and she says, no.
Awesome.
So I looked over, and I was like, I think that's legit. I am not going to do one right now, but ask me sometime later.
Ask me whenever the next Olympics are.
Oh, that's awesome.
And honestly, it takes a lot out of you, and so that was the right direction for that conversation to go. I was at WordCamp US just this last year, and Nathan came up to me, and this was when I was asked also, and he asked me if I was interested, and I said yes, I would be interested. He said, okay, cool. Call your wife, and then ask your boss, and then let me know what you find out.
That's perfect.
So that's how that conversation went down. So in my case, I think planning works very differently for everyone in terms of when you run a release. I really like that the last few times around, they've been announcing them ahead of time so that the release leads have a while to chat with folks and kind of figure out what they want to do with the release and things like that. In this case, I was the first one in the group, so I found out about 4 days before it was announced-ish. I'm sure someone will go online and say exactly how much it was, but it was around that. But it was at WordCamp US, so I then spent the time going around and chatting with previous release leads and component maintainers and other folks that were going to be working on the release to see their interest, how much they were going to be involved, and things like that to start to build out what was going to be possible.
Very cool. Very cool. I've always wondered how this works, like how both how where the names come from.
Sure.
This particular one was Coleman. Earlier in the show, we were talking about how the naming ends up working out, and if you end up with somebody's first name, somebody's last name, and that sort of thing. George, what were you saying on the pre-show?
Just that, by my understanding, it's just Matt picks a person at the time. It's kept fairly close to the vest, and normally we go by first name basis with all the jazz musicians, except for certain times when, like, I think it was WordPress 4.0 was named after Django Reinhardt, and when they tried calling it WordPress 4 Django, the folks that do the Django framework got a little bit annoyed at us, so we changed it over to WordPress Reinhardt. But there's odd little naming conventions that happen here and there that things happen to fit into. Things sometimes get a little bit interesting. There's been a lot of discussion over why aren't there more releases named after women, which there have been a few lately, but by and large, when you're looking at dead jazz musicians, there sadly aren't that many women to choose from. But trying to move more.
I think what they wanted
balance.
to do was, I think they wanted to put a D in front of Django, but I think they couldn't get the movie rights to that, so.
Oh, come on, Ryan.
No. Django Reinhardt, legendary
Amazing musician.
violinist with Stephanie
Yeah.
Grappelli and Gypsy Jazz.
I like it. Schroder,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Schroder, I have a question for you, and what it is when I could imagine that you have a million requests, and like I want this little thing here. How do you go about deciphering what you truly think should be put into a core? Like, is it a panel? Is it a discussion? Is it a one giant group text message? How does that go down?
Gut reaction: say no to everything.
No, sure, fair enough. But I mean, I mean, like,
All the owls start
that goes
swarming in
back-
on the house.
No, but that goes
Yeah,
back
voters.
to Nason's article that he likes to post about like what's necessary to have in a core committer, and that being your gut response to any feature request, any change should be by default no, and then be able to be persuaded if it's something that's actually more beneficial to the project as a whole.
So, other folks might think about it differently than I do, but I definitely didn't come to the release thinking this is a list of things that must be in it, because you can't. There's only WordPress is built by volunteers,
right.
and so that means that to a large extent it's built by people who want to build the thing that they want to build.
Sure.
Now, if it's obvious that something that they're interested in building is not appropriate for core, then we'll have a conversation, or more often than not, there is a conversation in dev chat about that feature with interested parties, and really open to the entire community about these things. And of course, I have gut feelings about things, especially when it comes to options, right? Anything that's going to add something to the UI, especially if it's going to be an option. Decisions, not options, wins. Not all the time, but basically all the time. So when I say not all the time, I mean things obviously get added to the UI. So
Right.
obviously there was UI that was added for the theme logo feature,
Right.
for the custom logo feature. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about.
So was that something that you were super interested in? Was that something that someone approached you and said, let's do this? Like, how did that go down? Like, as an example of a feature that got
Sure.
added and that also had a UI that was involved in it.
Sure, absolutely. So that was something that Constantine contacted me about halfway through the dev period at the beginning of the release, and said, hey, I might be, I'm working on porting this feature. And so I had a conversation with him about, what it was, the arguments for it, the arguments against it, and then started talking with a lot of folks about what they thought. Eventually, it did come up in both, and this is something I could have done better, actually. It eventually ended up both being brought up in a dev chat so that everyone could talk about it, and had a post on Make Core. It should have had a post on Make Core before it did. Debating it. It had been a feature that had been debated for a while in Track, but hadn't had that same sort of discussion on Make Core, and Make Core has a lot wider group of people that read it. So that's something we could have done better for sure, or that I could have done better for sure. But essentially, it went through all of that feedback process, and we changed a decent amount of things based on that feedback process between the time when the original patch was proposed and with what went into core. So
Nice.
it's always helpful for those exact reasons.
Yeah. So did you get any of the nascent superpowers where you can like remember like random numbers, sequence of numbers just for no particular reason, and you just rattle them off real quick?
No.
Oh, so bad. You would have thought that they would have like bottled that up and then like just like handed it off from place to place, but I guess
Well,
not.
I think Dominic is the current owner of that power.
Nice. It does get handed down from generation to generation. Huh?
So at least so current release lead holds that. So that's good.
Very cool. So if I remember correctly, in this particular release, there was a dot release that happened, right? Like pretty soon after. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was so there's been a dot release, and it was about 2 weeks after, which is quick, but not by any means unprecedented.
Right.
And essentially, we did a little bit of a different thing this last time around with the leading of the minor release, and so I had a conversation with first Aaron Jorban and then a few other people about what usually happens after major releases. And usually what happens, first we'll start with the idea. So previously the idea had been that the release lead from the previous release would have all responsibility for coming in and handling the minors as when they need to happen, and making sure that the proper things get committed and making sure that the release goes out in a timely manner, things like that. What happened in reality was that release leads are totally spent at the end and often aren't prepared to do something like that immediately after if it needs to happen. And I'm not talking about any particular, it's just been a trend that I've noticed and that we had noticed, and that's what happens. You're tired after you've gotten the release out the door. And so in an effort to basically to have responsibility for users and make sure that they get fixes if they need to, if those fixes need to be released immediately after that happens, I decided to pass that on to Adam Silverstein, who's my deputy on the release, and Pascal, who, Swiss Spidey, I don't actually know how to pronounce his he'll correct me, I'm sure, afterward, but who is a committer to handle that. And so they went through and looked at all the things that were going on and what they felt was the highest priority and could be fixed and needed to be fixed sooner, and worked with the people working on those patches to be able to roll that out quickly, and super appreciative of that effort. I hope it's something that'll continue, but we'll see. That's not directly up to me.
Man, that has to be a huge, crazy, daunting task of like, okay, you're gonna push and you push, and there must be some like huge, like board or something that you're looking at that's just like watching all of them go through and seeing what things are happening with people's updates and stuff. Like, how'd that feel for you to like go, okay, well, I'm either breaking everybody's websites right now, or I'm totally making a bunch of people happy by being able to have these new features show up on here.
So it's interesting. I don't have visibility into the meta bits that make the package and release the package and auto updates and how they work and things like that. So I don't actually know what that looks like. So I can't tell you that. I can say that there's a certain amount of nervousness that comes with it. It's mixed, right? Super excited to have it released, and at the same time, there is a very real possibility of breaking a large percentage of the internet. And
Totally.
Tons of work goes into making that not happen as much as possible.
Are there some things, Mike, that you just like dread talking about, like when it comes to security or when it comes to like how comments are going to be handled? Like, are those conversations that could be better, or like security obviously could always get better over time, but I mean, I think that's the first thing people want is like make it more secure, do this. How do you handle those kind of conversations? Like,
So I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah.
how did you approach like taking on, because there were a few things in this release with security that beefed it up a little bit. So how did you handle those, like to determine, all right, this is what we probably should do? Because that's a hard question, right?
So fortunately, that was not down to me. The security team handles security patches. And I mean, I probably could have said, let's not bundle this thing if there was some real serious reason that it shouldn't be included. But the truth of the matter is that I think the security team knows issues with regards to the security far better than I do. And so I defer to Nikolai and everyone else on the security team as far as what they think should be included when, as far as if and when they think that a minor release is appropriate, and definitely worked with them on scheduling and things like that. But those things are in the hands of the security team for sure.
So, okay, so then my next question then is you have this team and they say, here's what we're going to bundle into this release. Do you have to make everybody aware, like, okay, here's the functions that they're dropping in, or you have to check against this now instead of checking against that? Like, how do you update?
Well, a lot of that happens in the This Week in Core posts on makewordpress.org/core.
Oh, okay.
Going through the minutia, we have there's several people. Mike, you were one of the early people that did the This Week in Core, weren't you?
Yeah.
Wait, did you actually start that?
So I think I started what it is
Yes.
current incarnation, but this is something that was done some time ago. I don't know who the first person was, but it might have been Boren, actually. It might have been Ryan Boren. It used to be far along, years ago, that something very similar to This Week in Core was a summary that was posted. And it has started and then gotten lost a few times. I think I started the kind of most recent iteration, which is the last few years, but it's something that's been attempted to be done regularly for some time. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and so huge props go out to the folks that are working on it.
See, I didn't know that. I learned something cool today.
Yeah. And it's basically, current iteration is a very low-level look. It goes through all the change sets that happen, sums them up, divides those into these are the important ones people should be aware of happening. These ones, well, no one really cares about them anyway, except for folks that have to use them. Here's media. We'll just ignore that entirely. But it's a great way of having one thing to hit in your inbox every week versus actually paying attention to Firehose, which is like literally everything happening on track dropping into your email inbox.
Interesting. I did not know about that.
Let's see what else do we got here. So I was looking through some of the questions that we had from folks, because I've had this conversation come up a few times here, and we wanted to talk about this and wanted to get someone who we really knew, and I was like, oh well, I know Mike. This is gonna be awesome. Let's make this happen. So one of the things that has always kind of made me think a little bit about how WordPress is built itself is like, are you looking back in the previous ways in which these things have been released and are learning from it? And the thing is that since this changes every single time, like, do you have to go back to like the 4 or 5 different leads and go like, hey, so what did you do wrong that I should not do, or what are like, how does that knowledge base kind of get passed along, other than you like digging through track looking to see when somebody was throwing a bunch of like crazy emojis in there or something, or just going nuts? So what's that knowledge transfer like, I guess, and how's that knowledge transfer going for you to the next person?
So first, more emoji is always good for core, right?
Or cowbell. Or cowbell is always good too.
But so I would like to hope that we're always learning something. I'm sure that there are always some things that are missed and some things that are not passed along. Some of the things we're trying to do are in terms of additional documentation. So one of the things that happened throughout the release, but especially during release checklists and things like that, we're updating those release checklists and making sure that the things that I missed got added to those lists, or that I noticed were missing, or whatever, however it came down. So having more checklists and more, this is something that Ryan Bourne is also pretty excited about, is just documenting more and more and more of our process, because there's no reason that those things shouldn't be public. They should be public. All of that, there's absolutely no reason all of that information shouldn't be public. So moving as much as we can to handbooks is good. As far as sort of personal learning and takeaways and things like that, I know for me, a lot of that came from chatting with previous release leads. So, well, first, from Nascent, from him passing on a lot of the information when we co-led the release. And that was invaluable, really. And then after that, talking to previous release leads about their experiences and things that went well and things that didn't. And thirdly, and this is something that we still need to do for 4.5 that I haven't scheduled yet, so this is a good reminder, is doing a retrospective, like was done for the last couple versions, talking over, okay, what did we learn and what did we still not learn from the previous version? What went well, and what do we still need to learn from and change? And so I think that's another helpful practice.
I mean, things that we've seen in the past as we approach shipping releases, there have been release leads that have been fine with, hey, this is obviously a clear fix to what's a regression. Let's get that committed, even if it's like less than 24 hours before shipping the final release. Then there's been other releases where it's been more of a, it's 7 days until we're going to submit. We're not going to change any code, no matter how trivial, just because they want a very long code freeze. And if you committed something, then you had to restart the code freeze all over again. Where exactly do you fall on that spectrum, and how important do you think that long or any code freeze is when you get more into the nitty-gritty and the minutia of a release?
It depends.
Yes, that is like the motto of the show. Good job. It always depends, right?
But seriously, it depends. Ideally, you have, like, to me, the point of release candidate is release candidate, and we did some things that ran counter to that. Specifically, the about page ran counter to the idea of release candidate, and that's something I would have liked to see frozen, at release candidate. It isn't often possible in real life, and it wasn't possible this time, but definitely before it was in. Other than that, I feel like the point of release candidate is a code freeze. It doesn't mean we don't change anything, but it means this is where we think we'd like to be. And so as much frozen as we can possibly be, let's do that. So that's the way that I think about it from then on. And then as each issue comes up, you have to think, well, how important is this? Is it a regression? Is it not a regression? And is it a serious enough? Is it a serious enough issue that we would do something like release a minor release immediately after to fix it?
Oh wow!
That's like bundling the DLC with your actual
right.
game.
And if it is, then why
Right,
should
exactly.
we not fix this? And then go through the reasons. What else could it break? What other regressions could this thing cause? If it's only related to that new feature, then maybe you want to do it. And this is kind of the way that, at least the thought process that I went through. That if it's related only to that new feature and it can only break that new feature, then yeah, let's do it. And this happened with a couple of fixes for the custom logo feature during RC. We looked at, well, what could it affect back in the past? How far back and what things exactly? And then made decisions based on that. So had we come down to the very end and it'd been 24 hours, less than 24 hours before, and there was something pretty major, I definitely would have thought about whether the release should be pushed by a day, and made that decision based on severity and the amount of code that had been changed. I think everyone likes to say, well, if any code goes in within 24 hours, it should be punted, and I think systematically that's the right thing to do. But in the end, it would probably depend on exactly what it is and how well understood how clear the potential things for it to break are. And of course, in saying all of this, it's not just me looking at this stuff. It's everyone. I would have probably even more quickly if I didn't know the code. And in a lot of these cases, I don't know all of the systems of WordPress.
Yeah, it
To
sounds
their
like
bare bones. I don't know all of the history of TinyMCE or the customizer all the way back to the beginning. So
Right.
I'm going to reach out to the maintainers of that component and say, what could this break? How severe is the issue? How do you rate it? Let's talk about it.
scary. It's like you don't want to second guess yourself, but you want to make sure that you're still the leader, and that you're pushing this whole thing forward,
Right.
and you're not feeling like you're dragging it, like you're not like pulling it behind you,
So in the end, what was your favorite feature that shipped in 4.5?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think the one that I have enjoyed using the most so far, and it might be different than what is my favorite feature, but the one I've enjoyed using the most so far is inline links.
Oh, it's the coolest thing.
Because it's the thing that as I was writing posts for Make and for news and things like that, I kept coming to it just, man, this just makes so much sense. This makes so much sense. It makes it so much easier.
It freaked out a few people during our OC meetup where we're showing them the new feature and how you can do this, and they're like, "Oh, this box comes up." Like, I really want this new thing to show up below it. I really want to be able to have, like, all these people had all these different reasons, and I'm like, but look, you can highlight the text and then just paste the link,
Right?
And it instantly makes it into a link, and they're like,
then you
okay,
just keep typing. It's
Like,
great.
okay, I'm sold.
It's so great. And I mean, I'm sure that it will iterate on the feature. This is V1 of the feature, so that's a thing. But I love that.
Well, like Target, it's like, how do you deal with Target? Now you have to go and push the gear and then open it up and then make the change and then save it.
Right.
Wait, how often are you
For a better solution? Don't. Ignore it entirely. Let the user decide if they want to be in a new window.
I think that this is an example of starting out with a more minimal interface, and then it's part of that whole decisions not options thing. For now, we're deciding this, and if it looks like users need other things, then we can talk about changing the interface, because WordPress is all about iteration, and so that's something we can still do.
What was the other thing? You said that this may not be the one that you would have. So what was the other?
So the other one is a bit more biased.
Okay.
Because I helped out with it. But I really like what we did with the smarter image resizing stuff, which essentially it's due to a lot of the research and work by Dave Newton and Joe McGill. But images created by WordPress are now up to half smaller. 50%.
That's awesome.
50%. And Dave Newton and Joe both went and dug into it and used DSSIM scores to find out exactly how different they were, and they are visually identical, at least as far with 100 given within a very small to very, very small measurement.
It's not
visually
night and day,
imperceptible
is what you're
differences.
saying,
Right.
Yeah.
For 50% smaller. That's huge. And it was fun to work with them, and also with Aaron Hockley, who went through and gave a photographer's perspective on what information they would he would like to see included, and they would like to see included. It was a fun collaborative process too.
That's awesome. Well, folks, that is all the time we have for today. Mike, thank you for stopping by and hanging out with us. I really appreciate it. I think it's amazing that you guys saved 50% of the internet's bandwidth just by doing that. Awesome, awesome. That's how it goes, but we're going to sell it that way. That's what the headline's going to say.
They did that in 15 minutes.
Right, exactly. So, folks, make sure you go to our website at WPwatercooler.com and go check that out there. If you want to subscribe, you can go to WPwatercooler.com/subscribe and then click on all the links there to subscribe using your various sources and stuff. So thank you very much. You guys have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.